Flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror usually mean help has arrived. But for Terence and Chloe Washington, stranded on a freezing, pitch-black stretch of Interstate 84 with their young son, those lights signaled the beginning of a nightmare. The badge approaching their broken-down SUV didn't belong to a protector. It belonged to Officer Harrison Bradley, a man who saw their skin color before he saw their desperate need for assistance. What Bradley didn't know was that his cruel, racist refusal to help this terrified family was being watched in real time. His badge, his career, and his freedom were about to vanish in the blink of an eye. The wind howling across the flat plains of Illinois was unforgiving. It was late November, the kind of deep, biting cold that didn't just chill the skin, but seemed to seep directly into the bones. Terence Washington gripped the steering wheel of his 2019 Ford Explorer, his knuckles turning a faint shade of ash in the dim light of the dashboard. He kept his eyes locked on the road ahead, the hypnotic rhythm of the windshield wipers pushing away the light, icy sleet that had begun to fall an hour prior. In the passenger seat, his wife, Chloe, was asleep, her head resting against the glass, a thick wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. In the back, their 8-year-old son, Andre, was dead to the world, clutching a tablet that had run out of battery somewhere near the Indiana border. They were on their way back to Chicago after spending the Thanksgiving weekend with Chloe's extended family in Ohio. It had been a joyful, loud, and warm celebration. But now, the isolation of the midnight highway was creeping in on Terence. Interstate 84 near the town of Oak Ridge was notoriously desolate. There were no street lights, no gas stations for miles, just endless stretches of harvested cornfields hidden in the suffocating darkness. Terence glanced at the fuel gauge. Half a tank. They were fine. But then, the engine gave a violent, unnatural shudder. Terence frowned, easing off the accelerator. The car jerked again, this time harder. A loud, metallic grinding noise echoed from beneath the hood, followed instantly by a barrage of warning lights illuminating the dashboard like a Christmas tree. The battery light, the check engine light, and the oil pressure warning all flared red and yellow. No. 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 Come on, Terence muttered under his breath, desperately trying to pump the gas pedal. There was no response. The power steering locked up, turning the wheel into heavy stone in his hands. Chloe jolted awake at the sudden deceleration. "Terry, what's happening?" "I don't know. We're losing power," Terence said, his voice tight with rising panic. He muscled the heavy steering wheel to the right, aiming for the narrow shoulder of the highway as the SUV's momentum rapidly bled away. They coasted onto the gravel, the tires crunching loudly before the vehicle came to a dead, heavy stop. The silence that followed was immediate and terrifying, broken only by the relentless howling of the wind outside. The heater, which had been blasting warm air moments before, died. The headlights flickered once, twice, and then shut off completely, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. Andre stirred in the back seat. "Mum, are we home?" "Not yet." "Baby, go back to sleep," Chloe said, turning to look at her husband. Even in the shadows, Terence could see the fear in her eyes. "Terry, what's wrong with the car?" "I think the alternator just blew, and it took the battery with it." Terence sighed, reaching for his phone. He unlocked the screen, his heart sinking as he looked at the top right corner. No service. Not even one bar, Chloe pulled out her own phone. Nothing here either. We're in a total dead zone. The temperature inside the car was dropping at an alarming rate. The metal frame of the SUV offered zero insulation against the biting winter gale. Terence zipped up his heavy coat and reached for the door handle. "Stay inside. Keep the doors locked," Terence instructed. "I'm going to pop the hood and see if it's something I can temporarily rig. Maybe a loose belt. Terry, be careful. Cars fly down this road. They won't see you in the dark," Chloe warned, her hand reaching out to squeeze his arm. Terence stepped out into the freezing night. The wind immediately hit him like a physical blow, stealing the breath from his lungs. He pulled out a small tactical flashlight from his pocket and popped the hood. A cloud of acrid, metallic-smelling smoke billowed out. He waved it away, shining the beam onto the engine block. The serpentine belt was shredded, wrapped tightly around the alternator pulley like a black snake. The alternator itself looked scorched. There was no quick fix for this. They were completely, hopelessly stranded. He slammed the hood shut, the heavy metallic thud swallowed by the wind, and hurried back into the driver's seat, shivering violently. "It's dead," Terence said, his teeth chattering. "Belt snapped. Alternator is fried. We aren't going anywhere." "What do we do?" Chloe asked, pulling her coat tighter around her. "In the back." Andre was starting to cry softly, the dropping temperature biting at his small fingers. "We wait," Terence said, trying to keep his voice calm and steady for his family. "Someone will drive by. A state trooper, a plow, someone. We just have to wait." But waiting in Oak Ridge County was a dangerous game. Terence knew the reputation of this area. It was a sundown town in everything but name, a place where black families like the Washingtons were stared at with suspicion in broad daylight, let alone on a dark highway at 2 a.m. Terence reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small emergency flare, debating whether lighting it would bring salvation or trouble. He decided to hold off. He didn't want to draw the wrong kind of attention. 30 agonizing minutes passed. The cold inside the car was becoming unbearable. Andre was weeping openly now, his small body shaking uncontrollably. Chloe had climbed into the back seat to wrap her arms around him, using her own body heat to try and keep him warm. Terence was desperately rubbing his hands together, staring into the rearview mirror, praying for headlights. Then he saw them. 2 bright beams of light pierced the darkness, approaching from the rear. Terence let out a gasp of relief. "Someone's coming! Chloe, someone's coming!" He stepped out of the car, waving his arms wildly. As the vehicle got closer, Terence saw the unmistakable silhouette of a police cruiser, its light bar dark but its headlights blinding. The cruiser slowed down, the gravel crunching as it pulled up about 20 feet behind their dead SUV. The red and blue lights suddenly flared to life, illuminating the snow-dusted highway in a dizzying, strobe-like effect. "Thank God," Terence whispered, his breath pluming in the freezing air. He walked back toward the cruiser, ready to explain their situation, ready to get his shivering wife and child into the warmth of the police vehicle. But as the door of the patrol car swung open, the relief that had washed over Terence evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that had nothing to do with the winter air. Officer Harrison Bradley stepped out of his cruiser, his heavy boots crunching against the frosted gravel. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, his face weathered and set into a permanent, hostile scowl. He didn't carry a flashlight. Instead, he immediately unclipped the retention strap on his holster, resting his right hand, casually but deliberately, on the grip of his service weapon. "Stop right there. Put your hands where I can see them." Bradley barked, his voice cutting through the howling wind. Terence froze, instantly raising both hands to shoulder height. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. My family and our car broke down. The alternator." "I said stand still," Bradley interrupted, taking slow, measured steps toward Terence. He looked Terence up and down, his eyes narrowing. He didn't look at the broken-down SUV. He didn't look at the hazard lights that wouldn't turn on. He just stared at Terence with a deep, unmistakable suspicion. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" "We're driving back to Chicago. We were visiting family for Thanksgiving. Our car just died. My wife and my 8-year-old son are in the back seat. We've been freezing for over half an hour. We don't have any cell service to call a tow truck." Bradley reached his left hand up and clicked a button on his shoulder radio. "Dispatch, I got a disabled vehicle on I-84 mile marker 112. One male subject outside the vehicle. Run a 1028 and a 1029 on an Illinois plate." Bradley squinted, reading the license plate off the back of the Explorer. "Officer, please," Terence said, his voice trembling from the cold. "My son is freezing. Can they at least sit in the back of your cruiser to warm up while we wait for the tow to?" Bradley ignored the plea. "License and registration. Now, slowly." Terence carefully reached into his coat pocket. "My wallet is in my left pocket. I'm going to reach for it." "No sudden moves," Bradley warned, his grip tightening on his holster. Terence pulled out his license and handed it over. "The registration is in the glove box. I have to open the passenger door to get it." Bradley snatched the license, shining a blinding penlight directly into Terence's eyes, then down at the card. "Terence Washington, Chicago address." "Awfully far from home, aren't you?" "Terence, I told you, we were visiting family. Officer, I need to get my son warm." Bradley walked past Terence, approaching the SUV. He shined his bright flashlight through the heavily tinted back window. Chloe threw her hands up to shield her and Andre's eyes from the piercing beam. "Roll it down," Bradley shouted, tapping aggressively on the glass with the heavy metal end of his flashlight. Chloe fumbled with the controls, but the car was dead. She pushed the door open slightly. "Officer, please help us. The heater is broken. My baby is freezing." "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," Bradley ordered coldly. "What, it's 10 degrees out here?" Terence yelled, taking a step toward his wife. "Get back," Bradley roared, whipping around and shining the light squarely in Terence's face. "I said step out of the vehicle. Both of you. Let me see some identification." Terence swallowed his anger. He knew the rules of survival in situations like this. You comply. You swallow your pride to stay alive. "Chloe, just do what he says. Bring Andre," shivering violently. Chloe stepped out of the car, wrapping her coat around Andre, who was sobbing into her side. She handed her driver's license to the officer. Bradley looked at the 2 IDs, then back at the family. "Whose car is this?" "It's mine," Terence said. "I bought it 2 years ago." "Is that right?" Bradley sneered, a sickening smirk playing on his lips. "Because a 2019 Explorer is an expensive ride for folks from your neighborhood. You sure you didn't borrow this from someone? Maybe forget to return it." Terence felt the heat rise in his chest, a stark contrast to the freezing wind. "I am a high school principal. Officer, my wife is a registered nurse. We own that car. Now, are you going to call a tow truck for us or not?" Bradley's eyes darkened at Terence's tone. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by a black man on his stretch of highway. You've got a lot of attitude for someone asking for a favor. Terence, you people always come down here acting like you own the place, expecting a handout. A handout? I'm asking for a tow truck. Terence's voice cracked with disbelief and anger. Bradley keyed his radio again. Dispatch. What's the status on those plates? A staticky voice replied. Plates come back clean. Registered to a Terence, Washington. No warrants, no flags. Bradley looked visibly disappointed. He handed the IDs back, practically shoving them into Terence's chest. Well, you're clear? Great. The tow truck? Terence asked, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form the words. Andre was crying louder now, the wind whipping his small face. Bradley looked at the little boy, then at Chloe, and finally at Terence. His face was a mask of sheer, malicious indifference. Dispatches backed up, wrecks all over the county from the ice. Could be 3, maybe 4 hours before a truck gets out here. 4 hours we'll freeze to death. Let them sit in your car, Terence begged, his pride entirely broken by the fear for his son's life. You can lock me in the back. I don't care. Just give them some heat. My cruiser isn't a taxi service, Bradley said flatly, and it sure ain't a warming center. I got real calls to attend to. Domestic disputes, burglaries. I can't sit out here babysitting you because you didn't check your engine before a road trip. Chloe stared at the officer in horror. You're just going to leave us here, in the dark, with a child? Bradley shrugged, adjusting his duty belt. There's a gas station about 4 miles up the road. I suggest you start walking. It'll keep your blood pumping. Walk, are you out of your mind? Terence shouted, stepping forward. The utter cruelty of the suggestion snapped whatever restraint he had left. It's pitch black. The roads are covered in ice, and cars are doing 70 miles an hour down this highway. We have an 8-year-old child. You are a police officer. It is your duty to protect and serve. Bradley's hand instantly flew back to his gun, his face contorting into an ugly, hateful snarl. You take one more step toward me, boy, and I'll drop you right here on the pavement. You want to spend the night in a warm jail cell, because I can arrange that right now. Threatening an officer, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. I'll take you in, and your wife and kid can walk to the gas station by themselves. How does that sound? Terence froze. The word boy hung in the icy air, a heavy, poisoned barb. He looked at Bradley's hand on the gun, then looked at Chloe, whose eyes were wide with terror. She shook her head slightly, begging him silently not to do anything. Terence felt a tear of pure, impotent rage slip down his frozen cheek. He slowly backed away, putting his hands up. That's what I thought, Bradley sneered, turning his back on them. He swaggered back to his cruiser, opening the door and letting a blast of warm, heated air escape into the night. He climbed in, slammed the door, and rolled down the window just an inch. Good luck with the walk. Terence ran to the window, slapping his hand against the glass. Please don't do this if you won't take us. Just radio for a tow and wait with your lights on so we don't get hit by a semi. Please. Bradley ignored him. He put the cruiser in drive. The heavy vehicle lurched forward, kicking up a spray of ice and gravel that pelted Terence's legs. Terence stood in the middle of the shoulder, watching the red tail lights of the police cruiser slowly pull away. The red and blue emergency lights shut off, plunging the highway back into complete, suffocating darkness. Chloe collapsed against the side of the dead SUV, sobbing into her hands. Terry, what are we going to do? He just left us. He just left us to die. Terence rushed over, wrapping his arms around his wife and child, pulling them into a tight huddle against the side of the car to shield them from the wind. "We're going to be okay. We're going to get back in the car. We'll use the blankets from the trunk. We're going to survive this." Down the road, about a quarter of a mile away, Officer Bradley was chuckling to himself in the warm comfort of his cabin. He loved moments like this. He loved putting those people in their place. In his twisted mind, he was doing the town of Oak Ridge a service, sending a clear message that certain folks weren't welcome around here. He reached out to turn up the heat, the radio humming with a country song. He didn't notice the shadows moving behind him. Further back down the highway, hidden in the pitch blackness of an abandoned way station, just a mile behind where the Washingtons had broken down, 2 vehicles had been sitting with their engines idling and their lights completely off. They were massive, heavily armored black SUVs. Inside the lead vehicle, Chief of Police William Sterling sat in the passenger seat, his face illuminated only by the faint glow of a rugged laptop mounted on the console. Beside him in the driver's seat was Robert Jenkins, the lead investigator for the state's Internal Affairs Division. Chief Sterling was a man who commanded respect. A 30-year veteran of the force, he had spent the last 5 years trying to clean up the notoriously corrupt and biased Oak Ridge Police Department. He had heard the whispers about Officer Harrison Bradley, the complaints from minority drivers, the disproportionate traffic stops, the accusations of abuse of power. But Bradley was smart. He always managed to toe the line, turning off his body cam at convenient moments, claiming equipment malfunctions, leaving no hard evidence for Sterling to fire him. Until tonight, as part of a brand new, highly classified state oversight initiative, Bradley's cruiser had been outfitted with a secondary, hardwired dash and cabin audio system that could not be manually disabled by the officer. The feed was streaming directly to Chief Sterling's laptop in real time. Sterling and Jenkins had watched the entire interaction. They had heard every word. They had seen Bradley's hand hovering over his gun. They had heard the thinly veiled racial slurs. They had watched him abandon a freezing family on a dangerous highway. Chief Sterling's jaw was clenched so tight his teeth felt like they might crack. The disgust in his stomach was acidic. "He actually left them," Sterling whispered, his voice shaking with a quiet, terrifying rage. "He left a child to freeze. We have it all." "Chief," Jenkins said, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Audio, video, telemetry. It's a complete dereliction of duty, reckless endangerment, civil rights violations. He's done. He's not just done. He's going to prison," Sterling growled, slamming the laptop shut. He grabbed his police radio, switching it to a private, encrypted tactical channel. "Unit 2, this is Sterling. Move in. Box him out." "Copy that, Chief." A voice cracked back over the radio from the second black SUV. Jenkins slammed his foot on the gas. The massive black SUV roared out of the way station, its engine a deep, guttural growl. They didn't turn on their sirens. They didn't turn on their emergency lights. They just accelerated into the darkness. 2 apex predators hunting down a rogue wolf. Ahead of them, Officer Bradley was humming along to his radio, glancing at his mirrors. He saw nothing but darkness. He was king of the road. Then, suddenly, his rearview mirror exploded with a blinding wall of LED high beams. Bradley jumped in his seat, shielding his eyes. "What the hell?" he muttered, tapping his brakes. Before he could even process what was happening, the second black SUV surged past him on the left, cutting aggressively across the front of his cruiser and slamming on the brakes. Bradley was forced to lock up his tires. his heavy patrol car fishtailing wildly on the icy road before skidding to a violent halt just inches from the rear bumper of the lead SUV. "Hey, are you crazy?" Bradley yelled, rolling down his window, his hand immediately going for his weapon. The doors of both unmarked SUVs flew open simultaneously. 4 men stepped out into the freezing wind, all wearing tactical gear. The man leading the charge didn't need an introduction. Bradley's heart stopped dead in his chest. His hand fell away from his gun as if it had been burned. Striding toward his window, his face a mask of absolute, unyielding fury, was Chief William Sterling. "Step out of the vehicle, Bradley!" Sterling's voice boomed over the wind, louder and colder than the winter storm. "Right. Now." The freezing wind suddenly felt entirely different to Officer Harrison Bradley. It was no longer a minor inconvenience he could block out by rolling up a window. It was a physical manifestation of the icy dread currently paralyzing his entire body. He stared through the windshield of his cruiser at the 4 men surrounding him. Chief William Sterling stood front and center, his posture radiating an absolute, unyielding authority. "Chief," Bradley stammered, his hand trembling as he finally pushed the heavy door open and stepped out into the biting cold. He tried to force a confused, comradely smile onto his face, falling back on the old boys club mentality that had protected him for over a decade. "Chief Sterling, what the hell is going on here? You guys nearly ran me off the road. I'm just on patrol." "Shut your mouth and put your hands on the hood of your vehicle," Sterling barked. There was no hesitation, no room for negotiation. It was an order delivered with the blunt force of a sledgehammer. Bradley's fake smile vanished. The color drained from his weathered face, leaving him looking sickly and pale under the harsh glare of the unmarked SUV's headlights. "Chief, be reasonable. What is this about? Is this a drill?" Robert Jenkins, the lead investigator for internal affairs, stepped forward. He didn't yell. His voice was dangerously calm, which somehow made it worse. "Officer Bradley, you are being ordered by your commanding officer to place your hands on the hood of your vehicle. If you do not comply in the next 3 seconds, you will be physically subdued." 1. Okay, Jesus. Take it easy," Bradley muttered, turning around and placing his palms flat against the freezing metal of his cruiser's hood. His breath hitched in his throat. This wasn't a drill. The men flanking Jenkins were state troopers in tactical gear. They were treating him like a hostile suspect. Jenkins moved in swiftly. In one fluid motion, he unclipped Bradley's duty belt, letting the heavy rig complete with his service weapon, taser, and handcuffs fall to the icy pavement with a loud, disgraceful clatter. Next, Jenkins firmly patted him down, checking his ankles and pockets for secondary weapons. "Chief, I demand to know what's going on," Bradley said, his voice pitching higher with rising panic. He turned his head to look over his shoulder. "I haven't done anything wrong. I just cleared a disabled vehicle down the road. Some folks from Chicago. I checked their plates. Everything was fine. I was heading to my next patrol sector." Sterling stepped closer, invading Bradley's personal space. The chief's eyes were like flint. "You checked their plates. You saw they had an 8-year-old child in the back seat. You knew the temperature was 12 degrees and dropping. And then you told them to walk 4 miles to a gas station in the pitch black." Bradley swallowed hard, his mind racing. How did he know that he had checked his dash cam? He always knew how to manipulate the angles, how to muffle the audio. The dispatch logs wouldn't have that level of detail. He decided to play dumb. "Chief, you've got it all wrong. They were being hostile. The driver, he was aggressive. I felt my safety was compromised. I was going to call it in for a tow once I got back to a secure area where I had better reception." Bradley lied, the words spilling out in a desperate, pathetic rush. "You know how it is out here. You can't trust people from the city rolling through Oak Ridge at 2 a.m. I was just following standard safety protocol." Sterling let out a harsh, bitter laugh that held zero humor. Hostile. The man was a high school principal begging for his family's life. He asks you to put his freezing child in the back of your car, and you threatened to arrest him and shoot him. You put your hand on your weapon. Harrison. You called him boy. Bradley's heart plummeted into his stomach. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He couldn't breathe. He called him boy. He had said that. But there was no way Sterling could know those exact words unless— "That's right," Jenkins said, noticing the terrified realization washing over the corrupt cop's face. Jenkins reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet, tapping the screen. Suddenly, Bradley's own voice echoed out of the tablet's speakers, perfectly clear despite the howling wind in the background. "You take one more step toward me, boy, and I'll drop you right here on the pavement. You want to spend the night in a warm jail cell?" Bradley stared at the tablet, his jaw slack. Where did you get that?" "State Oversight Initiative," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "A secondary, hard-wired audio-visual system installed behind your dashboard 3 weeks ago. Feeds directly to a secure server. You couldn't turn it off. You couldn't tamper with it. We've been listening to you for a month. Harrison, we heard every biased stop. We heard every slur you muttered under your breath. But tonight you crossed the line from a prejudiced liability to a criminal. Chief, please," Bradley begged, his knees suddenly feeling weak. The arrogant, untouchable aura he had carried for years shattered completely. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. His career was over. His pension was gone. "I panicked. I made a mistake. Don't do this. 20 years on the force. You can't throw me to the wolves over one bad call. You threw a family to the wolves." Sterling spat, his face inches from Bradley's. "You disgraced that badge. You disgraced this department. And I am going to make absolutely certain that you never wear a uniform in this state or any other ever again." Sterling nodded to Jenkins. Jenkins pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his own belt. He grabbed Bradley's right wrist, wrenching it behind his back with zero gentleness. The cold metal bit into Bradley's skin. Click. He grabbed the left wrist. Click. "Harrison Bradley," Jenkins recited, his voice echoing in the dead of the night. "You are under arrest for felony reckless endangerment, official misconduct, aggravated assault under the color of law, and civil rights violations. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Bradley began to sob. Ugly, gasping tears rolled down his cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the brutal wind. The man who had acted like a god of the highway minutes ago was now nothing more than a shivering, broken criminal. "Put him in the back of my vehicle," Jenkins ordered the state troopers. "No heat. Let him feel exactly what he left that family in." As the troopers dragged a crying Bradley away, Sterling didn't waste another second. He turned on his heel and sprinted back to his armored SUV. The takedown was complete, but the real emergency was still a mile back down the road. Inside the dead Ford Explorer, the situation had gone from dire to critical. Terrence had pulled every piece of clothing from their suitcases' sweaters, jeans, t-shirts, and piled them on top of Chloe and Andre in the back seat. He had wrapped his own heavy winter coat around his son, leaving himself in nothing but a flannel shirt. Terence's lips were blue, his teeth chattering so violently he thought they might shatter. Beside him, Chloe was rubbing Andre's hands, praying softly. Andre had stopped crying 10 minutes ago. He was dangerously lethargic, his eyes half closed, slipping into the terrifying early stages of hypothermia. "Terry, he's too cold," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind outside. "He's not responding right." I know," Terence rasped, forcing his frozen limbs to move. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'm going to light the flare. I don't care who sees it. We need someone to stop." He reached for the door handle, but before he could pull it, the interior of the SUV was suddenly flooded with intense, blinding white light. Terence flinched, throwing his hands over his face. The rumble of a heavy engine vibrated through the frozen frame of their car. Terence's blood ran cold. Bradley, the racist cop, had come back, but why? To make good on his threat, to arrest him and leave Chloe and Andre alone. Panic and adrenaline flooded Terence's system, momentarily overriding the freezing temperatures. He reached under the driver's seat, his hand closing around the heavy metal shaft of a tire iron he kept for emergencies. He wasn't going to let that badge-wearing monster touch his family. If he was going to jail tonight, he was going to earn it. He kicked his door open and stepped out into the blinding glare, gripping the tire iron tightly by his side, his muscles tense and ready to swing. But the silhouette that stepped out of the massive black SUV wasn't Bradley. It was an older, taller man wearing a thick tactical winter jacket with a gold star pinned to the breast. He wasn't reaching for a gun. Instead, he was holding 2 massive, thick thermal emergency blankets. "Mr. Washington," the man yelled, rushing forward. He didn't approach with the cautious, aggressive swagger of a cop on a traffic stop. He ran toward them like a paramedic rushing to save a life. Terence stood frozen, his grip slightly loosening on the tire iron. Who are you?" "I am Chief William Sterling of the Oak Ridge Police Department," the man said, stopping a few feet away, keeping his hands visible and non-threatening. "I know what happened. I know what Officer Bradley did to you. I am so deeply, profoundly sorry. Please put the tool down. You are safe now. Let me get your family into the heat." Terence stared at him, his mind struggling to process the words through the haze of the freezing cold. "He knows what happened. He's the chief." Sterling stepped closer, holding out the thermal blankets. "My car is running. The heat is on maximum. Bring your wife and your boy. Now." The promise of heat broke through Terence's defensive shock. He dropped the tire iron. It clanged loudly on the icy pavement. He turned and practically ripped the back door of the Explorer open. "Chloe, come on, grab Andre." Sterling was there instantly, taking the heavy, lethargic boy from Chloe's arms and wrapping him tightly in the metallic thermal blanket. "I got him, Mum. Come with me." Terence helped his shivering wife out of the car, wrapping the second blanket around her. Together, they hurried the few feet toward the idling black SUV. Sterling opened the rear doors, and the family scrambled inside. The physical sensation of the heat hitting Terence's frozen skin was almost painful. It was a blast of glorious, life-saving, tropical warmth. Chloe collapsed into the soft leather seats, pulling Andre tightly against her chest, rocking him as the hot air from the vents began to thaw his numb cheeks. Chief Sterling climbed into the driver's seat, immediately turning back to look at them. He pulled a heavy thermos from the center console. "Hot tea. Have your son drink this slowly." Terence took the thermos with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at the chief in the rearview mirror. How did you know we were here? How did you know what he did?" Sterling sighed, the heavy weight of leadership and shame evident on his face. "Mr. Washington, my department has been investigating Harrison Bradley for weeks. We had a hidden microphone and camera in his cruiser. I was listening to the entire interaction. I heard every word he said to you. I watched him drive away." Chloe looked up from Andre, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You heard him, and you just let him leave us. I couldn't blow the sting operation while he was standing in front of you with a loaded weapon." Sterling explained gently. "He is a volatile, dangerous man. The moment he drove away and you were safely out of his crosshairs, my internal affairs team intercepted him. He never made it a mile down the road." Terence felt a wave of shock wash over him. "Where is he now?" "He's currently sitting in the back of an unheated transport vehicle in handcuffs," Sterling said, his voice hardening with grim satisfaction. "He has been stripped of his badge and his weapon. Tomorrow morning, District Attorney Winston Gable will be formally charging him with multiple felonies, including a federal civil rights violation. We've already contacted Attorney General Samantha Higgins. They are going to make an absolute example out of him. He will never see the outside of a prison cell if I have anything to say about it." Terence leaned back against the headrest, closing his eyes as a single tear escaped and rolled down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of fear or cold anymore. It was the overwhelming release of surviving a nightmare. The hard, heavy hand of karma had swung with lightning speed. "A tow truck is en route for your vehicle. It will be taken to a secure, heated garage in town." Sterling continued, his tone shifting back to gentle professionalism. "I have already booked the presidential suite at the Oak Ridge Grand Hotel under my department's expense account. We're going to get you there, get you warm food, and a doctor will be waiting to check on your son. Everything is taken care of." Andre shifted in Chloe's arms, his color finally starting to return. He took a small sip of the hot tea, letting out a soft sigh. "Mum, it's warm." "I know, baby," Chloe cried softly, kissing his forehead. "We're safe." As Chief Sterling put the SUV in drive and began to guide them safely back toward civilization, leaving the desolate, freezing highway behind, Terence looked out the window into the darkness. The terror of the night was fading, replaced by a profound realization. There were monsters wearing badges in the world. Men like Harrison Bradley, who wielded their power like a weapon against those they hated. But there were also men like Chief Sterling, men who stood in the darkness, watching, waiting, and ensuring that when the monsters revealed themselves, justice struck back with relentless, uncompromising force. The real story, Terence knew, was just beginning, and the reckoning that awaited Harrison Bradley would shake the entire state. The morning sun over Oak Ridge brought no warmth to the frozen landscape. But inside the presidential suite of the Grand Hotel, the Washington family finally felt safe. Terence sat at the edge of the plush king-sized bed, watching Chloe sleep with her arms still wrapped protectively around Andre. A doctor had visited them at 4 a.m., confirming that while Andre had been dangerously close to severe hypothermia, his core temperature had stabilized. He was going to be perfectly fine. But as Terence watched his family breathe in the quiet, heated room, his mind was a tempest of anger and anxiety. He knew how the system worked. He had seen it on the news 100 times. Cops like Harrison Bradley, rarely faced true justice. They got paid administrative leave, a slap on the wrist, and a quiet transfer to another precinct. Terence swore to himself, gripping the heavy hotel coffee mug in his hands, that he would not let this go. He would burn the city down with lawsuits before he let Bradley wear a badge again. What Terence didn't know was that the fire had already been lit. At the Oak Ridge County Courthouse, a vicious battle was unfolding behind closed doors. Officer Bradley, looking haggard and terrified in an Orange County jumpsuit, sat beside his defense attorney, Peter Russo. Russo was a notorious local bulldog, a man who had built a lucrative career defending the worst of Oak Ridge's old guard. Across the heavy oak table sat District Attorney Winston Gable, lead investigator Robert Jenkins, and Chief William Sterling. "This is a witch hunt." "William," Russo sneered, tossing a manila folder onto the table. "That secondary recording device in my client's cruiser. It constitutes an illegal wiretap under state law. You didn't have a warrant for audio surveillance on a sworn officer. Every piece of evidence you gathered is fruit of the poisonous tree. I already spoke to Judge Montgomery this morning. He's prepared to suppress the tapes and grant Harrison a release on his own recognizance by noon." Bradley puffed his chest out slightly, a ghost of his former arrogance returning to his eyes. He smirked at Chief Sterling. "You tried, Chief, but you can't touch me. I know too many people in this town." Chief Sterling didn't blink. He just stared at Bradley with a look of absolute, freezing pity. "You really think this is a local issue anymore?" "Harrison." Before Russo could speak, the heavy mahogany doors of the conference room swung open. Two men in dark suits stepped in, followed by a sharply dressed woman carrying a thick leather briefcase. She had an aura that instantly sucked the oxygen out of the room. Attorney General Samantha Higgins. The woman introduced herself, her voice like cracking ice. She didn't offer to shake anyone's hand. She walked directly to the head of the table. "Mr. Russo, your conversation with Judge Montgomery is irrelevant. At 6 a.m. this morning, my office filed a motion transferring this case out of Oak Ridge County jurisdiction. The state of Illinois is taking over. Furthermore, the Federal Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has officially opened a parallel investigation." Russo's face went completely pale. You can't do that over a simple dereliction of duty charge." "It's not dereliction of duty, Counselor," Higgins fired back, pulling a document from her briefcase and sliding it across the table. "It is aggravated assault under color of law, official misconduct, and a federal civil rights violation. And regarding your illegal wiretap theory, the Oak Ridge Police Union contract, renegotiated last year, explicitly waives the right to privacy in a patrol vehicle for all on-duty officers. You signed it yourself, Harrison." Bradley's smirk vanished entirely. His breath hitched as he looked at the document. It was a signed federal warrant. "Oh, and one more thing," Jenkins added, leaning forward with a dark, satisfied smile. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, the dash cam and audio footage were logged into public evidence. A reporter from the Chicago Tribune submitted a Freedom of Information Act request an hour later. The footage went live on their website 10 minutes ago." "You leaked it," Russo gasped, standing up. "You just tainted the jury pool." "We complied with transparency laws," Sterling corrected smoothly. "Something this department is going to be very good at from now on." By noon, the world knew the name Harrison Bradley. The audio of the traffic stop, the terrified pleas of a father, the crying of an 8-year-old boy, and the cold, racist, monstrous threats of the officer echoed out of cell phones, televisions, and radios across the country. The public outrage was instantaneous and nuclear. The karma hit Bradley's life with the force of a freight train. By 2 p.m., the local police union, seeing the national tidal wave of fury, publicly released a statement completely severing ties with Bradley and refusing to fund his legal defense. By 5 p.m., his wife filed for emergency separation and took their children to her mother's house, refusing to be associated with the monster the world had just heard on tape. When Judge Montgomery, terrified of the national spotlight and federal scrutiny, denied bail entirely, Bradley was sent to the maximum security wing of the state penitentiary to await trial. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from a king of the highway to a universally despised, isolated prisoner. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago was a fortress of media vans and protesters. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from the backwoods, old boys' club courtrooms of Oak Ridge. This was a realm of absolute, sterile justice. Terence Washington sat in the witness box, wearing a sharp charcoal suit. He looked strong, composed, and undeniably dignified. He had spent the last 2 days recounting the horror of that freezing November night. He spoke about the drop in temperature, the absolute darkness, and the visceral, sickening fear of looking into the eyes of a man who held the power of life and death, and seeing nothing but hatred. When he told you to walk 4 miles to the gas station, did you believe he was making a suggestion? The federal prosecutor asked gently. No, Terence said, his voice echoing clearly across the silent courtroom. I knew it was a death sentence. He knew my son wouldn't survive a 4-mile walk in 12-degree weather. He left us there because he did not view us as human beings worthy of his protection. At the defense table, Harrison Bradley looked like a completely different man. He had lost 30 pounds. His hair had thinned and turned entirely grey. The swagger, the cruelty, the bloated ego had been utterly hollowed out of him. He sat slumped in his chair, refusing to make eye contact with the jury, with Terence, or even with his own overworked public defender. The trial was a massacre. The audio tape was the absolute nail in the coffin, but the prosecution didn't stop there. Chief Sterling testified to Bradley's long history of suppressed complaints. State troopers testified to the severity of the weather that night. A medical expert detailed exactly how close young Andre had been to falling into a fatal hypothermic coma. When the jury retired to deliberate, it took them less than 2 hours. On the federal charge of deprivation of rights under color of law, we find the defendant, Harrison Bradley, guilty. The jury forewoman read, her voice steady and resolute. Bradley closed his eyes, his shoulders shaking as the reality of his destroyed life finally crushed him. Judge Eleanor Brooks, a stern, brilliant federal judge, looked down from the bench, her expression devoid of any sympathy. Mr. Bradley, you took an oath to protect the public. Instead, you weaponized your badge to enforce your own bigotry. You terrorized a family. You abandoned a child to the freezing cold, and you disgraced the uniform you wore. Society entrusts law enforcement with immense power, and when that power is abused with such blatant malice, the punishment must be absolute. Judge Brooks struck her gavel. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison to be served at the United States Penitentiary in Florence, Colorado. There will be no possibility of early parole. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. 15 years in federal lockup for a former cop was a brutal, terrifying sentence. It was the hardest, coldest karma imaginable. As the federal marshals pulled Bradley to his feet and shackled his wrists and ankles. He looked back at the gallery one last time. His eyes met Terence's. Terence didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at the broken man, nodded once in finality, and turned his back on him forever. The aftermath of the trial brought sweeping changes. The Washington family filed a massive civil lawsuit against Oak Ridge County. They didn't just win a multi-million-dollar settlement. They forced a federal consent decree upon the Oak Ridge Police Department. Chief Sterling was given full, unquestioned authority to gut the department, firing corrupt officers and implementing stringent, unbreakable oversight protocols. Terence and Chloe didn't keep the settlement money for themselves. They used the majority of it to establish the Safe Roads Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing emergency roadside assistance and legal advocacy for minorities traveling through historically biased jurisdictions. They turned the darkest night of their lives into a beacon of light and safety for thousands of others. As for Harrison Bradley, his new reality was a cramped, concrete cell in the freezing mountains of Colorado, stripped of his power, his family, his pension, and his freedom. He was forced to spend the next 5,475 days thinking about the freezing night he left a family to die and the moment justice finally caught up with him. Stories like Terence and Chloe's remind us that while the darkest parts of humanity still exist, the light of justice, accountability, and truth is infinitely stronger. It serves as a powerful warning to those who abuse their authority. Karma never loses an address, and the truth will always find a way out of the dark. The Washington family proved that courage in the face of absolute terror can not only save a family, but can reform an entire system, ensuring that no one else has to endure the nightmare they survived. If this story of ultimate karma, survival, and real-life justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this video to help spread the message that corruption will not win. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss out on these incredible, true-to-life stories. Drop a comment down below. What would you have done in Terence's situation? Let's keep the conversation going.